May 1944, the Pacific Ocean became the stage for one of the most astonishing undersea hunts in naval history. What began as routine patrols and coded Japanese transmissions quickly escalated into a relentless pursuit that would change the balance of the war beneath the waves. Over just 12 days, the destroyer escort USS England and her companions achieved the unthinkable. 6 Japanese submarines sent to the ocean floor, more than 400 trained submariners lost, and an entire squadron wiped out before it could complete its mission. For the Americans, the victories came at no cost in lives. Not a single sailor aboard England, George, or Raby was killed or wounded. The campaign highlighted a devastating combination of advantages: the precision of the hedgehog weapon, the accuracy of advanced sonar and radar, and the brilliance of mathematical attack planning that transformed submarine hunting from guesswork into exact science. For Japan, it was a disaster beyond repair. Submarine losses outpaced replacement, morale crumbled, and strategies built around reconnaissance and surprise collapsed before they could be executed. For the United States, it was proof that technology, training, and intelligence could decisively reshape the battlefield. The story of USS England is not just about 6 submarines destroyed. It is about the moment when undersea warfare shifted forever, from a deadly contest of stealth to a war ruled by precision, calculation, and overwhelming industrial power. May 13th, 1944, inside the Fleet Radio Unit Pacific at Pearl Harbor, the quiet of the room was broken only by the scratch of pencils as American codebreakers worked methodically over intercepted Japanese transmissions. Their task was relentless, taking unfamiliar symbols and rendering them into English words that could shift the course of battles thousands of miles away. On this day, their efforts uncovered a message sent from submarine I-16. It described an imminent mission, a rice delivery scheduled for Bin in southern Bougainville. What looked like a mundane supply note carried immense weight, for it revealed movement of a Japanese boat that would soon cross paths with American hunters. Lieutenant Commander Robert Williamson, reading the decrypted lines, lowered his coffee cup, pushed back from his desk, and picked up the secure telephone. Orders quickly rippled outward. 3 destroyer escorts, the USS England, USS George, and USS Raby, would move to intercept. None aboard those ships knew that this single decoded message was the spark that would ignite one of the most lethal and decisive anti-submarine campaigns in naval history. The Pacific War had demonstrated to the Americans that Japanese submarines were not simply offensive weapons meant to sink ships. They were lifelines stretched thin across an enormous ocean, arteries carrying food, ammunition, and reinforcements to distant island garrisons. If those veins could be severed, entire Japanese strongholds would wither from starvation and lack of supplies. The Imperial Japanese Navy's 7th Submarine Squadron, commanded by Admiral Somu Toyota, had already strung a defensive line across the ocean, stretching from Truk Island to the Admiralty Islands. 7 submarines, I-16, RO-104, RO-105, RO-106, RO-108, RO-116, and RO-117 patrolled the deep, waiting for signs of American fleets moving toward the Palau Islands or the Marianas. Their mission was simple, but crucial: serve as the unseen watchers. Beneath the waves. Out on the Pacific, the USS England cut through rolling swells at a steady 23 knots. Built as a Buckley-class destroyer escort, her 1,400-ton hull was designed not for show, but for efficiency, speed, and the deadly work of hunting submarines. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Walton Pendleton stood over the tactical plot, eyes sharp, reading every movement and possibility in the lines and markings spread across the charts. His crew of 186 men depended on his judgment, but they were not empty-handed. The England carried a formidable suite of anti-submarine weapons, 2 racks for depth charges, 8K guns that could launch 300-pound charges 150 yards into the sea, and, most importantly, a weapon that had changed the nature of submarine warfare forever, a 24-barrel hedgehog mortar system mounted just ahead of the bridge. Unlike traditional depth charges that detonated indiscriminately at preset depths, the Hedgehog fired spiked projectiles that exploded only upon striking a solid object. Each projectile weighed 65 pounds and carried 35 pounds of powerful torpex. Explosive. Fired in volleys of 24, they created a lethal curtain through which no submarine could easily slip. The numbers alone were staggering. Conventional depth charges required upwards of 80 separate attack runs to claim a single kill. Hedgehogs achieved a kill roughly every 5 attempts. To Executive Officer John Williamson, those statistics were not mere numbers but the foundation of his tactical thinking. Educated at Cambridge and gifted with a precise mind for mathematics and physics, he understood that submarine combat boiled down to cold geometry. Sound waves moved through water at 4,800 feet per second. Sonar pings revealed positions, and success depended on aligning attack angles, depth estimates, and timing with such precision that even a fraction of a degree could decide whether an attack struck home or vanished into empty ocean. Aboard I-16, Lieutenant Commander Teyuchi Yoshitaka was immersed in his own calculations of risk. He reviewed the cargo manifest. Rubber sacks, each 75 pounds, filled with rice. Though humble in appearance, they represented sustenance for men, isolated on faraway islands. For Yoshitaka, supply runs such as this were the most dangerous missions of all. Unlike a patrol to hunt enemy shipping, supply runs meant exposing his vessel to danger from both above and below. Surfacing too long risked discovery by aircraft, but staying submerged meant drawing the attention of escort vessels armed with increasingly sophisticated detection tools. The I-16, displacing 2,180 tons submerged, was powered by diesel engines, when on the surface and by electric motors when underwater. Her crew of 94 men had endured countless brushes with death. Dive after dive under American depth charges, the rattle of machine gun fire from aircraft, the tense shadow duels with Allied submarines. They had survived thus far, but Yoshitaka knew the fundamental flaw of his vessel remained unchanged. As with all diesel-electric boats, she could not remain hidden forever. She would eventually have to surface to recharge batteries and refresh the stale air that suffocated the men within her steel hull. As the American destroyers neared their intercept zone, they formed a search line abreast, methodical and disciplined. USS George to port, USS Rabbi to starboard, and USS England in the center, the 3 ships sweeping the expanse like a wide net cast across the sea. Each vessel used SG surface search radar to monitor above the waves and QC sonar to probe below. Their sonar operators rotated in exhausting 15-minute shifts, ears trained to discern the subtle nuances that separated harmless ocean noise from deadly enemy contact. They learned to separate whale calls from metallic echoes, schools of fish from the hard reflection of a submarine's steel casing. Sonarman First Class David Chun had been doing this work for 18 long months across the Pacific. His hands moved with the ease of instinct as he guided the sonar's transducer head through its careful arc, pausing every few degrees, transmitting a ping, listening for its echo return. On May 19th, the sea lay calm, the water nearly perfect for carrying sound. With only minimal thermal layering, no invisible barriers deflected the sonar beam. At precisely 13:35, Chun's headphones delivered the sharp, unmistakable reply of a submarine hull. He knew it instantly, range 2,000 yards, bearing 90 degrees relative. His finger hit the alarm, and in the same breath he reached for the sound-powered telephone. Bridge. Sonar. Positive submarine contact, bearing 090, range 2,000 yards. Deep inside I-16, the hydrophone operator caught the telltale ping of American sonar probing the water. Lieutenant Commander Yoshitaka's voice rang out sharp. Dive immediately! Compressed air roared as emergency ballast vents opened, seawater rushing in as the submarine angled downward. The crew clung to handholds as the boat shuddered into its descent. Their training measured every second. Periscope depth in 45 seconds. 100 feet reached in just over 2 minutes. Above them, aboard the England, Executive Officer Williamson bent over the chart table, running swift calculations. He estimated the submarine's speed at roughly 8 knots, moving southwest toward Bougainville. Depth was unknown, but likely between 100 and 200 feet, standard for evasive maneuvers. The Hedgehog could reach targets 270 yards out, but its accuracy relied on predicting depth and path with pinpoint precision. At 13:41, the England launched her first Hedgehog attack. 24 projectiles burst from their spigots, arcing high before plunging into the sea, their patterns spread carefully across 40 yards of ocean. They dropped fast, 8 feet per second, but as the seconds passed, there was silence. No explosions. A complete miss. Williamson adjusted instantly. He reasoned the Japanese commander had taken his boat deeper, slipping beneath a thermal layer at 150 feet to blur his acoustic trace. He altered the ship's course and prepared for another attack run. This time, 3 of the projectiles were set for greater depth. At 13:58, the second salvo leapt from the Hedgehog. Moments later, a dull, muffled thud rolled through the water. A sound transmitted into the hull of the England and felt in the bones of her crew. It was a hit, but only a partial one. Through the sonar equipment, Williamson could hear the grinding, irregular noise of damaged machinery echoing from below. The I-16 was hurt, but not yet finished. She still moved, still evaded, her crew fighting desperately to survive. At 14:10, the third salvo was launched. Williamson had pegged the submarine at about 200 feet, but the fathometer after the run showed the boat at 325 feet, meaning the Hedgehog pattern had fallen harmlessly overhead. I-16's captain was proving craftier than expected, wringing every tactical edge from his crew in the sea. The fourth pass failed when the submarine executed a sudden, dramatic course reversal at the last instant. Hydrophone crews on I-16 had learned to read American attack rhythms, counting the seconds between sonar pings to predict when weapons would arrive. Rudder slammed hard to port, negative ballast was blown, depth shifted by 50 feet, standard evasive moves that had kept Japanese submarines alive through much of the Pacific campaign. At 14:33, Williamson completed his final solution. Bearing 170 degrees, range 400 yards, depth 250 feet. Taking sonar propagation delay into account, England's 5th Hedgehog salvo drove 4 to 6 projectiles into I-16's pressure hull. The blast heaved England's fantail clear of the water and sent a shock through both vessels that knocked men off their feet. Seawater gushed through ruptured plates in I-16's forward torpedo room. Emergency lights flickered and failed, and the bow began angling toward the abyss 3 miles down. 20 minutes later, wreckage started to surface, life preservers stamped, with Japanese characters, fragments of wooden planking, and an oil slick spreading across the central Pacific. I-16 and her complement of 94 had joined the growing list of Japanese submarines that would never return to port. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific had intercepted more than one dispatch. On May 20th, cryptographers broke a second transmission that exposed the 7th Submarine Squadron's patrol alignment. 7 boats arrayed across a route Admiral William Halley had used twice before to move the 3rd Fleet, RO-104, RO-105, RO-106, RO-108, RO-109, RO-112, and RO-116. Admiral Toyoda's deployment made tactical sense. Station submarines at choke points where American carrier forces would be most exposed, forcing the U.S. either to risk attacks or to detour and lose days. The plan counted on American anti-submarine units detecting individual boats, but being unable to locate and annihilate an entire screen before it could be shifted. Commander Hamilton Haynes, in charge of Escort Division 39, was ordered to sweep the Japanese line from west to east. 3 destroyer escorts against 7 enemy submarines. On balance, the arithmetic favored the Japanese, but it did not reflect American technological edges and the deadly precision of England's Hedgehog. At 03:50 on May 22nd, The George picked up a radar contact, a surfaced submarine 8 miles distant. The Japanese boat had been running on the surface to charge batteries, a necessary but dangerous routine that left it vulnerable. A searchlight picked out the silhouette as the George's 5-inch guns swung toward the contact. RO-106 crash-dived in 38 seconds, but the Americans already had enough data on position and course. The George attacked with hedgehogs at 04:15, but missed when the submarine executed evasive maneuvers around 200 feet down. Its hydrophones had detected the incoming pattern and triggered emergency measures. England regained sonar contact at 04:25. Williamson, applying lessons from I-16, refined his method. Compute depth from sonar delay, factor in likely evasion speed and turning radius, and predict the most probable position 60 seconds after initial contact. His first salvo missed, but the second at 05:01 delivered at least 3 direct hits. The underwater detonations sent a towering column of water and debris skyward. RO-106's pressure hull was breached in several places. Emergency ballast systems failed, and the submarine sank by the stern with all 59 hands lost. 2 submarines had been destroyed in 4 days. Japanese naval intelligence monitoring local radio traffic began to see a pattern. American anti-sub units were systematically hunting the 7th Squadron with unfamiliar tactics and weaponry. Urgent. Orders went out to the remaining boats to maintain radio silence and avoid surfacing except in extremis. But the Americans had momentum and technical advantages the Japanese could not match. Radar that could detect submarines at ranges beyond 10 miles, sonar with the resolution to track targets through thermoclines and currents, and the hedgehog system that solved many of the traditional depth charge problems. Depth charges required attackers to pass over the target and then lost sonar contact during the drop, giving submarines a window to maneuver. Their detonations churned the water and created acoustic interference that could blind sonar for up to 15 minutes. Hedgehog fire was launched ahead of the ship while sonar remained locked. Missed attacks generated little acoustic clutter, so follow-ups could be immediate, and contact-fused projectiles exploded only on direct impact, removing false damage, readings, and masking effects. RO-104 became the 3rd submarine to encounter the American hunter-killer group. Around 06 hours on May 23rd, the Rabbi detected a surfaced boat on radar roughly 250 nautical miles north-northwest of Cavieng, New Ireland. The submarine's radar warning gear worked and it dived within 45 seconds, but that interval was long, enough for American fire control to lock onto course, speed, and the dive point with mathematical precision. Rabbi carried out 4 hedgehog attacks between 06:17 and 07:15, all misses as the sub's commander employed increasingly desperate counters, bursts of tuned sound to try to jam sonar, abrupt course changes, depth swings between 50 and 300 feet, and sudden compressed air releases to create false acoustic targets. Every trick learned over 3 years of Pacific combat. George joined the action at 07:17 with 5 consecutive hedgehog runs, also without success. The enemy skipper proved exceptionally skilled at evasive seamanship, using currents and temperature gradients to mask his position, whipping the rudder, running silently with minimal propeller noise, and manipulating ballast to change depth without giving clear acoustic cues. By 08:19, Williamson calculated a final solution. RO-104 had been evading for more than 2 hours and was draining batteries and compressed air reserves to unsustainable levels. Sooner or later, she would have to curb active evasion to preserve power for essential systems. Williamson plotted the most likely location based on those energy constraints and ordered England in. At Oder 8:34, 24 hedgehog projectiles bracketed the estimated position. 10 to 12 struck the pressure hull. Seawater flooded the engine room and forward battery compartments as emergency ballast systems faltered, and 3 minutes later remaining compressed air bottles ruptured in a massive underwater explosion. Debris and oil reached the surface by 10:45 and all 58 crew members were lost. 3 submarines had been sunk in 5 days. A run of kills like that would have been near impossible with older methods alone. Early in 1942, depth charges yielded kill rates of only about 3%, climbing to roughly 30% by the war's end as tactics and gear improved. Hedgehog's approximate 20% success rate represented a 6-fold jump in lethality, but raw statistics only tell part of the story. The blow to Japanese submarine morale was profound. Intercepted radio traffic showed commanders asking to abandon patrol positions and fall back to safer waters, and captured reports painted a picture of crews shaken by rumors of American super weapons that seemed unnervingly precise. At Deck 120 on May 24th, USS George picked up RO-116 on radar at about 8 miles, a surfaced contact steaming at 12 knots toward the eastern end of the patrol line. The submarine skipper had apparently gambled on speed over stealth and paid for it. England acquired sonar contact at 0150 as RO-116 executed an emergency crash dive, completing the procedure in 35 seconds, while American fire control calculations were already underway. Williamson, having refined his techniques from earlier encounters, launched a hedgehog salvo at Aero 214 that drove 3 to 5 projectiles into RO-116's hull. This sinking lacked the dramatic secondary explosion seen before. Newer Japanese construction and improved damage control measures lessened catastrophic detonations, but multiple breaches below the waterline produced uncontrollable flooding, the collapse of internal bulkheads, failing bearings as seawater swept the engine room, and agonizing structural sounds that lingered on the sonar for 20 minutes before RO-116 vanished into the abyss with all 56 hands lost. News of 5 submarines gone in 6 days made the England's unprecedented success impossible to ignore. Admiral Chester Nimitz demanded detailed after-action reports on tactics and weapon performance, and Admiral Ernest King moved to outfit more destroyer escorts with enhanced hedgehog systems. The hunt was not finished, with 3 submarines still at sea and Japanese signals intelligence beginning to grasp the scale of the disaster. Orders circulated to abandon isolated patrol points and consolidate remaining boats into a mutually supportive defensive screen. On May 26, a hunter-killer group led by the escort carrier USS Hoggett Bay and 4 Fletcher-class destroyers arrived to relieve England, George, and Raby, 3 escorts that had been operating non-stop for 8 days and were running low on ammunition and fuel. Rather than withdraw straight to Myas for resupply, Commander Haynes asked permission to make one final sweep en route after intercepts suggested RO-108 might be nearby, possibly attempting to link up with surviving units. England detected RO-108 at 2304 that night, sonar contact at 1,500 yards. The sub was moving southeast at about 8 knots while running shallow to conserve batteries and maintain higher speed. Williamson had his firing solution within 3 minutes, estimating depth around 120 feet. The target's steady course implied either ignorance of the attackers or an attempt to outrun them. At 23:23, a hedgehog pattern struck RO-108, and the submarine's destruction was instantaneous and complete. A tremendous underwater blast sent phosphorescent bubbles and wreckage skyward, emergency lights from flooded battery compartments glowing briefly beneath the surface before electrical power failed. 5 boats lost in 8 days. Only 1 enemy boat remained. RO-105, commanded by Lieutenant Junichi Inouye, with Captain Ryan Suko, the senior officer of Submarine Division 51, aboard as a passenger. RO-105 had been built at the Sasebo Naval Arsenal and commissioned in November 1943. Her crew had survived numerous encounters, including a narrow escape from 2 torpedoes fired by USS Tarpon on August 12, 1943, and a failed torpedo attack on the light cruiser USS Columbia in September 1943. The boat had also carried out successful aircrew rescues around the Solomons and New Guinea. Her combat experience and the skill of her officers made RO-105 the most dangerous remaining element of the 7th Squadron. Japanese Sixth Fleet intelligence had intercepted American transmissions that revealed the approximate location of England and her consorts, and ordered RO-105 to avoid contact and withdraw to truck for refit and crew relief. Fuel and battery limits, however, made an immediate breakout impossible without running on the surface through areas known to be patrolled by American aircraft. The final action began on May 29th at 21:30 when USS George detected RO-105 on the surface. The submarine crash-dived at once, but her position and bearing were fixed by American fire control. What followed became a grinding 25-hour duel of endurance. George launched repeated hedgehog attacks through the night, but failed to score as RO-105 adopted wildly erratic evasion, course changes every 3 minutes, depth swings from 60 to 300 feet, surgical slow-speed silent running, to cut propeller noise, and countermeasures such as bursts of compressed air to create false sonar echoes. By dawn on May 30th, both George and Raby had exhausted most of their hedgehog rounds with no success. RO-105's commander demonstrated extraordinary seamanship, manipulating ballast to alter trim angles, fine-tuning speed to reduce propeller cavitation, and deploying acoustic decoys at pivotal moments. Haynes had initially kept England in reserve to preserve his most capable unit, but after a day of futile attacks, he reversed course and committed her. At 07:36, he authorized England to engage. Executive Officer Williamson, who had been monitoring the fight and refining attack parameters from observed enemy behavior, estimated RO-105's depth at roughly 200 feet and its general course toward Bougainville with reduced speed to conserve batteries. England's Hedgehog salvo at 07:36 scored 6 to 10 direct strikes on RO-105's pressure hull. At 07:41, a catastrophic rupture of compressed air systems and simultaneous seawater ingress destroyed the submarine. Oil and wreckage burst to the surface, signaling the end of the 7th Submarine Squadron. Captain Ryan Succo, one of the Imperial Navy's most seasoned submarine officers, was among the 55 men lost, his death a blow not only to personnel, but to the accumulated operational knowledge of the fleet. 6 submarines lost in 12 days. The England's record patrol stood apart in anti-submarine history and was never matched. Admiral Ernest King's oft-repeated vow that there will always be an England in the United States Navy was later honored in 1960 when a guided missile destroyer bearing the name entered service, carrying on the legacy. The tactical consequences, however, were broader than a single ship's glory. The annihilation of the 7th Squadron shifted the strategic balance in the Pacific. Admiral Toyoda's plan to set up submarines for a decisive engagement with American carrier forces was undermined before it could pay dividends. Deprived of undersea reconnaissance and screening, Japanese naval intelligence and operational commanders were effectively blind. The encounter also crystallized hard lessons about the impact of radar, sonar, weapons design, and coordinated tactics on modern naval warfare. Between December 1941 and September 1945, American industry turned out 622,128 depth charges, a staggering output invested in conventional anti-submarine ordnance. The Hedgehog's superior lethality argued for a shift in naval design priorities from simply stockpiling explosives to fielding weapons that hit with precision. British wartime data suggested that standard depth charge attacks sank 1 submarine for roughly every 60 runs. The Hedgehog managed about 1 kill for every 6 efforts, roughly a 10-fold gain in effectiveness. When paired with advances in radar and sonar detection, the Hedgehog marked a disruptive step forward in undersea warfare. The psychological toll on Japanese submarine forces was severe. Crews that once trusted their ability to slip away now faced systems that struck with uncanny accuracy, and intercepted reports showed commanders increasingly reluctant to risk contact with Allied surface ships. Admiral Toyota responded quickly to the loss of the 7th Squadron, revising Operation AGO to reduce reliance on submarine reconnaissance and push surface ships and aircraft to take up the intelligence burden, a costly shift at a time when resources were already thin as the war reached its late stages. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific's cryptographic work had been decisive. Without the decrypted notice of I-16's supply mission and the mapped positions of the patrol line, American escorts would have been searching vast seas with negligible odds of interception. Equally pivotal was Executive Officer Williamson's mathematically rigorous approach to attack planning. By converting sonar propagation delays and observed enemy evasion into predictive firing solutions, he helped turn submarine hunting from an art into a repeatable science, a method that post-war reviews show was widely adopted across the Pacific Fleet. The human price was stark. Some 400 Japanese submariners perished during that 12-day sequence, not only immediate casualties, but the irreplaceable loss of seasoned sailors and officers whose skill required months of instruction and years at sea to develop. American units sustained no fatalities in the same period. Not a single man aboard England, George or Raby, was killed or wounded during the hunt. That gulf in losses reflected more than better tools. It revealed advantages in training, tactics, leadership, and industrial backing that compounded over time. Strategically, the outcome was ruinous for Japanese undersea forces. Japan had entered the war with 63 fleet submarines. By May 1944, fewer than 30 remained operational. Losing 7 boats in less than 2 weeks was an attrition rate Tokyo could not sustain, especially when domestic yards were producing roughly 1 new submarine a month, while Allied anti-submarine efforts were destroying far more than that. The arithmetic was unforgiving. Attrition would whittle away Japan's submarine arm long before it could significantly degrade American sea power. Technology magnified that imbalance. U.S. radar could, under good conditions, spot surfaced submarines at ranges exceeding 15 miles, and submarines, which had to run on the surface to recharge batteries and ventilate, were forced into predictable vulnerability windows the Allies could exploit. Sonar improvements removed many of the old advantages enjoyed by captains, diving beneath the waves. Where early systems lost contact during attack runs, ships like England used QC sonar to maintain continuous tracking through engagement sequences and to feed accurate targeting data to forward-firing weapons. The Hedgehog's contact-fused projectiles were the culmination of roughly 3 years of focused anti-submarine weapons development. Unlike depth charges that detonated at preset depths and churned the water into acoustic dead zones, Hedgehog bombs exploded only on impact, producing no masking turbulence and enabling immediate follow-up attacks. The scale of American production and training underwrote these tactical gains. By war's end, the United States had manufactured well over 600,000 depth charges and thousands of Hedgehog projectiles, K-gun launchers, and fire control devices, while training pipelines turned out large numbers of qualified sonar operators, depth charge crews, and other ASW specialists. Lessons learned in Atlantic convoy warfare were rapidly transferred to Pacific units, amplifying institutional knowledge and operational skill where Japanese training programs and industrial throughput could not keep pace. The England's 12-day spree therefore resulted from the convergence of signals intelligence, refined radar and sonar, advanced weapons, mathematically driven fire control, and highly trained crews supported by unmatched industrial capacity. As American capabilities kept improving and Japanese resources dwindled, the operational options for Japanese submarines narrowed to risky supply runs and token patrols. By June 1944, much of the offensive punch that had made submarines decisive earlier in the war had been neutralized by sustained losses and technological obsolescence. Although England continued to operate throughout the remainder of the war, she never again matched that concentrated run of victories. Her name, however, became shorthand for anti-submarine excellence and influenced naval procurement and doctrine for years afterward. Operation AGO, deprived of reliable undersea reconnaissance, helped leave Japanese forces blind at sea and was one factor leading into the decisive Japanese defeat at the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944. The precision math of Williamson's methods marked a turning point in naval combat, where calculation and industrial power began to outweigh intuition and lone heroics. In the deep, 7 Japanese submarines came to rest on the ocean floor, their crews remembered by both sides for bravery under desperate circumstances. Their loss signaled the end of an era in which individual skill could routinely overcome material disadvantage. The future belonged to nations able to mass-produce effective weapons like the Hedgehog and to train specialists to use them.